What if I told you there might be a pantheon of lesser gods residing in heaven that God himself rules over? The divine council. What is it exactly? Who's in it? And what is their purpose? We've talked about this before, or at least facets of it. Fallen angels, pagan deities, the hierarchies of heaven. But today, we're taking a step back and tackling this whole thing. Is a divine council made up of supernatural spiritual beings? Are they human, or are they something in between? Otherworldly creatures that are a lot closer to home than we realize. We'll be taking a look at passages like Psalm 82, where God judged among the other gods, Job chapter 1, where Satan himself, along with the sons of God, presented themselves to the Lord, and a few others. So, to help guide us on this journey, we will be listening to Dr. Michael Heiser, Sam Shamoun, and Dr. James White. To start us off, let's take a listen to who many believe to be the godfather of this theology, at least in Protestant circles. To explain his ideology, here is Dr. Michael Heiser.
What is the divine council? Now, this is a term that might be unfamiliar to many. It's going to be familiar to others because the term actually comes from the Bible. It comes from Psalm 82, specifically in verse 1, where we read, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. If you go down a little ways to verse 6, you get some more information. God is speaking and he says to his council, I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Now, with both these verses, there's a little more to them than meets the eye, especially if you're working in English translations. If we go back to Psalm 82, verse 1, we notice that while the translation is good enough, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. God has taken his place in the divine council, first part of the line. But we notice that the word for God in Hebrew is Elohim. That's no big deal, again, because we're used to that. Elohim is one of the most common words for God in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Old Testament. But what might be a surprise is that in the second half of the verse, we have, in the midst of the gods, he, God, holds judgment. The second occurrence of Elohim is translated gods. So here you have Elohim occurring two times in one passage, two times in one verse. The first time it is translated singularly, properly, because of the grammar. God takes his place in the divine council. And in the second part of the verse, it's translated properly, plural, because of the preposition in the midst of. It can't be in the midst of one entity. And so we have plural. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. If we take a little closer look at verse 6, where God is the speaker and he says to the members of his council, I said, you are gods. There we go again. We see the same word, Elohim. And that's put in parallel to another term, sons of the Most High, the B'nai Elyon. Now this is one of those terms that you'll see in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Old Testament, for what might loosely be called angelic beings, other divine beings who are part of the heavenly host. In many cases, many passages, those beings are referred to as the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, or the B'nai Ha-Elohim, or the B'nai Elim. Here we have B'nai Elyon, sons of the Most High. We know who the Most High is. It's God. So this is a synonymous expression for sons of God, which again is frequently used for divine beings, plural, in the Hebrew Bible. Now there are other passages that talk about a divine council. Passages like Psalm 89. And there we read, let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? A God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him. Again, there's a little bit more to look at here in this verse as well, specifically in Psalm 89, verse 6. Now, we again can read very straightforward in English, makes good sense, for who in the skies can compare to the Lord, can be compared. And then the next line is, who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? Well, notice again, heavenly beings is very obviously one of those stock expression for divine, as in plural, divine beings who work with God, who are part of the heavenly host, who are part of the divine council. Who among the heavenly beings, the Hebrew is B'nai Elim, who among the sons of God is like the Lord? Of course, the rhetorical response, the rhetorical answer would be nobody. Now, another passage is 1 Kings 22, specifically verses 19 through 23. But if you're not familiar with the backstory of this passage, in this passage, in this chapter, the wicked king of Israel, Ahab, is trying to convince Jehoshaphat to go with him to a battle. And Jehoshaphat would like a word from the Lord. Should I go or should I not? And so finally, after listening to the prophets of Ahab, again, the prophets of Baal, essentially, Jehoshaphat says, hey, isn't there a prophet of Yahweh around here? And they summon Micaiah, and Ahab says in the passage, I hate this guy because he never tells me what I want to hear. But nevertheless, Micaiah shows up, and this is what we read in verse 19. Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another. Well, who are these guys? Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, by what means? And he said, I will go out and I'll be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he, God, said, you are to entice him and you shall succeed. So what we have in 1 Kings 22 is a divine council meeting. We get a glimpse sort of behind the veil as to what's going on in heaven. Now, God has decreed that it's time for Ahab to die. But what we see in 1 Kings 22 is he allows the members of his council, the members of the divine council, to participate in how that decree will be carried out. And you'll notice in the passage that these are not idols. These are not men. The members of the heavenly host, the members of God's council, are spirits, because verse 21 said a spirit came forward and had a suggestion. So we're not dealing with, something really, really weird, like humans reigning with God in the sky. We're dealing with the heavenly host. We're dealing with the divine council, a council that Psalm 82 says are composed of plural Elohim. Another passage is Daniel 7. Now, we're familiar with this one because it's the famous Son of Man passage in the Old Testament that gets referenced and applied to Jesus when he's on trial before Caiaphas. But if you'll notice in this passage, we read something interesting in verse 9. Here, Daniel 7, verse 9. Daniel says, as I looked, thrones, plural, were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool, and his throne was fiery flames. Now we know who this is. This is God. The fiery throne with the wheels, Daniel goes on to describe. It's the same description as we get in Ezekiel 1, where God is on the throne in Ezekiel's vision. This is God seated, but there are thrones, plural. And we know that it's not just two. The Son of Man isn't seated, because the Son of Man will come to the Ancient of Days and then receive everlasting dominion. Later in the passage, we actually read that the court sat and, again, helped God to render judgment. So the divine council, again, participates in what's going on with God's decrees. So that's a brief overview of what in the world is this thing called the divine council. Again, in more familiar language, it's the heavenly host. But we need to pay attention to what's going on in Psalm 82:1, where the academic term really comes from. Psalm 82, verse 1, God, Elohim, takes his place in the divine council, and in the midst of the gods, in the midst of the Elohim, plural, he passes judgment. He renders judgment.
Michael Heiser believes the divine council is simply the heavenly host. However, he also believes that God chose a select few of this heavenly host to reign over the nations as gods. If you want to know when, how, and why this happened, I'll share a video up here for you, and I'll leave it down in the description that will answer all of those questions. Lately, this theology has spread like wildfire amongst Christian circles, especially on the internet. However, there are some who are pushing back against this ideology, claiming it to be henotheism, the belief in one supreme God without denying the existence of others. Our next speaker is one of those people. To explain his thoughts, here is Sam Shamoun.
If you guys don't know what the Divine Council is, it was made popular by the late Michael Heiser. Divine Council. He made it popular. He didn't invent it, he made it popular. Divine Council, if you guys don't know about Michael Heiser, he went to be with the Lord, he died of cancer, but he's alive. If you believe Jesus is Lord, and he is in union with Christ, and he was, he's alive and perfected. Now, he made popular this teaching called the Divine Council. What is the Divine Council? And this is in the Bible. There is a council in heaven where God is surrounded by spirit creatures. These spirit creatures have been created by God with powers, abilities. They've been endowed with abilities and powers that make them godlike, but they are not almighty. They're not uncreated. They're not equal to God. They are finite creatures who are superior in power and intellect over us humans, especially after the fall. So they can do things we cannot do. They're godlike in comparison to us. But they're creatures, they're limited, their power comes from God, and God can wipe them out instantaneously in a nanosecond because no one comes close to him. So this view, the Divine Council, became popular through the influence of Michael Heiser. But many people don't know this. Long before Heiser, Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons were already teaching the Divine Council motif. So it was new to evangelicals, but if you ask any evangelical Trinitarian apologist debating Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons in the 20th century, this view was already being forced down the throats of Christian Trinitarians by Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. They have been using this motif to try to prove there's more than one God. There are a host of gods, but these other gods are creatures. They're finite, they're limited, they're temporal, and Jesus is one of those gods, even though he's better than them. And only the Father is God absolutely. Only the Father is almighty and uncreated, and he's the creator and life giver of everything. Everyone understand? This Divine Council is something that evangelicals are now picking up and adopting from centuries of being used and abused by Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. So all these doctrines that were made popular by the cults are now being embraced as part of Protestant evangelical Trinitarianism. Okay, now let me tell you the three competing models of monotheism. You have Trinitarian monotheism, but even that comes in two forms. So let me go through these terms. You have monotheism, the belief there's one almighty, uncreated God, creator, sustainer, life giver of all creation. Now, this kind of monotheism has been broken into two subcategories. Okay, so you have this monotheism, but then you have henotheism. Henotheism. So you can be a monotheist without being a strict monotheist who thinks that no other God exists except Jehovah. You can be a monotheist who affirms henotheism. What is henotheism? Henotheism comes from two words. Hen, one, and theos, one God. What's the difference between that and monotheism? In henotheism, though you're monotheistic, you believe there's one God, you also believe there are other gods. But these gods are creatures who are finite, temporal, and limited. So hence there's only one God, Hen, who's almighty, beginningless, who created everything, and he created the gods. That's henotheism. Now, part of henotheism is another teaching. You see how complex it gets? All of this I learned when I was debating Jehovah's Witnesses, and now it's part of evangelical Protestantism. In the 90s, I used to oppose this teaching, and now it's part of Protestant evangelicalism So who am I opposing? My own Trinitarian camp? Anyway, so now part of henotheism includes what's known as monolatry. Monolatry. See how technical it gets? So let me break it down for you. Monos or monos, one and only. Latria, latruo. Monolatry is a subset of henotheism, because in henotheism, you acknowledge the existence of these gods, but you worship the one almighty God alone, monolatry. So you can be a monotheist who's a henotheist who affirms monolatry. Monolatry is the worship of one and only one God. Even though there are other gods, you only worship him. And who's him? Jehovah, the almighty, uncreated creator and life giver of all creation, who though he created these gods are not to be worshipped. And this is what Michael Heiser was promoting. This is what biblical scholarship promotes. This is what Jehovah's Witnesses promote. This is what Mormons teach, right? And this is what liberal scholars believe is the true original religion of the Israelites.
So, if the members of the Divine Council are not created spiritual beings ruling the nations like lesser gods, then what are they? Who are the gods referred to in verses like Psalm chapter 82, verse 1? I have two more perspectives to share with you. The final one completely turns all of this on its head and looks at the Divine Council in a completely different way. On top of that, it makes us look at Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God, the daughters of men, the Nephilim, in a way that we have not even discussed on this channel. But before we dive into that, let's take a listen to why these gods are not really gods. They're not even angels. To explain his point of view, here is Dr. James White.
This is a passage that I've had to deal with for quite literally now, sadly, decades in dealing with our LDS friends in Salt Lake City. This is one of their favorite passages because they will utilize this to say, see, there are many gods. We can become gods. Jesus himself taught so. Look at John chapter 10. And it's been asserted, well, look at what we have here in Hebrews 1:8. In these two passages, the inspired writers pull these passages that don't apply to the Almighty God, but to these lesser gods. Well, is that really the case? Well, Mr. Stafford has admitted that it's very easy to read Psalm 82 and recognize that the people that are in view here are unrighteous judges. They are the judges of Israel. Just read the psalm. It goes on to say, how long will you judge unrighteously? It talks about widows and orphans, and it talks in the next verse about them falling like any one of the princes and dying like a man. These are talking about human judges. They're unrighteous judges. So why does Jesus cite this? Well, it's not because he's saying, no, I'm just a God like you all are gods. What is he doing? He is applying this passage to them. They are the unrighteous judges. He says, how do you convict me of blasphemy when the Father has anointed me? He's identifying them as the false gods, as those who are the unrighteous judges in Psalm 82. This isn't some passage where somehow Jesus is saying, well, see, I'm just a God like judges are gods. That's not the intention of Jesus' rebuttal at all. He is, in fact, bringing charges against his accusers in that passage. And so you don't have angels being called gods here. The gods here are those who are judges. And why are they called gods? The very next verse says, you'll die like a man. Is anyone confused that what the scripture is saying is that these are true divinities? Is this really a parallel to the way that Jesus is called God, as being the creator, as being the one worshipped by all created things? Surely not. Instead, they're called gods because they're given God's authority to judge amongst the people, and they will be held accountable for how they utilize that authority.
So, according to Dr. James White, the Divine Council is not a divine council. Rather, Psalm chapter 82 is referring to mortal human judges. Now, our final perspective takes this idea and expands upon it in a way I have never heard before. How many of you know the story of Genesis chapter 6? We've talked about this multiple times on this channel. We've talked about various different interpretations of Genesis chapter 6. In one interpretation, the sons of God are angels, fallen angels, that come down, intermingle with the daughters of men, and create a half-angel, half-human hybrid race known as the Nephilim, spawning the giants. That worldview fits pretty cleanly with Dr. Michael Heiser's divine council ideology. These angels who come down could be looked at as gods or deities in other cultures, and their offspring, demigods. Take a look at the Anunnaki or the Greek pantheon, for example. But there is another ideology that looks at the sons of God not as divine beings, not as fallen angels, but as humans, or as created beings that do not reside in heaven. Now, you may say, well, what other created beings are there? If they're not humans on earth or angels in heaven, what else are we talking about? That's where this theory is incredibly unique. Let's turn our Bibles to Job chapter 1, and I'll explain.
Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan,
From where do you come?
From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it.
So, there are a couple things I really want to point out here. One, where is Satan coming from? He's coming from earth. He's been walking to and fro earth, and now he's presenting himself before God, which probably means he's not on earth right now. This whole scene is not taking place on earth. Two, he's presenting himself before God alongside the sons of God. So the sons of God, including Satan, have come to present themselves before the Lord. Does that mean Satan is one of the sons of God? And if Satan came from earth, where did they come from? Are you starting to see where this is going? Let's continue. Let's go to Luke chapter 3, the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and let's go all the way to the end, to verse 38.
The son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God.
Here, Adam is called the son of God. Now, what if in Job chapter 1 verse 6, the sons of God are actually Adams from other worlds? Who was Adam? God set Adam to be the caretaker of the earth. He was the representative of earth. What if these sons of God are representatives of their own individual planets scattered across the universe? Each individual planet has their own Adam, and they're all coming together for this council meeting and presenting themselves before the Lord. Now, immediately you might be saying, wait a second, then why didn't Adam show up here? Adam died. How could he even show up here? That makes absolutely no sense. Well, Adam fell to sin. Adam sinned. Eve sinned. Mankind fell. We sinned. What if that didn't happen on other planets? What if God created beings on other planets that didn't succumb to sin, that didn't fall? They still retain their holiness. Now you might be saying, okay, fine. Well, why did Satan show up? Well, after the fall of Adam, who was made ruler of earth? Wasn't it Lucifer? Wasn't it Satan? Isn't that absolutely mind-blowing? I've never heard this perspective before, that God is meeting with the representatives of other worlds, Satan representing earth. What do you guys think about that? I really need to know. What do you think about that theory? I myself am not entirely sure how I feel about it, because I do like the idea of the sons of God being fallen angels, simply because of how it connects the mythologies and the cultures around the world. But the truth is the truth, whether I jive with it or not. So I think this does still deserve some additional study. But what do you think about the divine council? Do you think they're supernatural divine beings that reside in heaven? Do you think they're mortal beings that reside on earth? Or do you think they are created beings from other worlds? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comment section, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.